session. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it is an honor to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Mr. Adam Rotmil. So he leads a product design for a digital health initiative at AstraZeneca, a leading biopharma company. He has worked as a designer for 25 years in many sectors, including financial, government, healthcare, and education. Adam teaches design for the Master of Professional Studies program at Maryland Institute College of Art. He has also worked as an English teacher for 4 years. He studied at the Art Institute of Boston, Savannah College of Art and Design, Basel School of Design, Switzerland, and Harvard University as well. Adam has published in Forbes magazine, the New York Times, and was a contributing editor at Advertising Week. Adam lives in Maryland with his wife and daughter, loves to cook, and cannot wait to travel again. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our speaker, Adam Rotmil.
Yay! Hey everyone, thanks for coming to hang out. First of all, I'm pumped just to see how many people came, how many people took time out of their day to come and hang out and talk about design. So I appreciate it, and I think, you know, doing this kind of stuff, especially during COVID pandemic, has been sort of like one of the few like social things that I still have where I could just randomly meet new people, and especially appreciate being able to connect with folks all around the world. And I think that there's just so many design universals, so many things about human-centered design that, regardless of whether you're in, you know, Joburg or the Netherlands or right here in Maryland where I am, there's a lot of things that we have in common in the way that we're approaching the work. So I'm just going to share a couple slides. Some of the stuff that I'm talking about, you know, let me put it this way. Some of it may be like kind of reviewing some of the basics if you have gone over a lot of this stuff before. But even if that's the case, I personally like to go back to some of the basics as well every once in a while. So I found it to be useful. And I think that what I've been thinking about a lot recently is that there's this overlap between just ordinary mainstream product design methods and sort of the scientific method, the principles of scientific method that I've been learning a little bit more about as I've been working with actual scientists. And so I think it's a good idea to sort of look at and celebrate some of the commonalities. Anyway, a little bit more about myself. I'm working at AZ on a digital health initiative doing product design. I teach a class once a year at Maryland Institute College of Art here in Maryland. I actually started out writing code when I was a kid because my uncle worked at IBM and we got one of the early computers, and I started designing in the mid-90s. I also love to cook. I've gotten into that even more during the pandemic, and I've been trying to get a bit healthier recently using the Noom app and this like Oura Ring device, which I've enjoyed in terms of calorie counting and all that stuff. So I think that I'm just interested in one of the exercises that we'll do today. It's like we'll go over a couple of key terms in the theory section, and then we'll take a look at brainstorming some ideas for experiments that we might want to run on sort of a hypothetical app. So let's just say we're going to look at a hypothetical app that is involved in behavioral nudges that could help you eat more healthy. What ideas might we come up with? And we'll just look at this general framework and do that. So I think that one of the great things about the scientific mindset is this idea of discovery, right? And in product, we call it product discovery because it's this time where we can sort of suspend judgment. We don't go into it with a preconceived idea of like, okay, this is the product we're going to build. Here's what it looks like. Here's how it works. Like in the old days, it used to be a lot more like that, where you'd get a list of requirements and all that stuff would be planned out in advance. And then you just build according to requirements and release a product. And only then after the fact, you might find out that people don't like it, or it doesn't work, or it wasn't even remotely what they wanted in the first place. So that ability to sort of stay curious and to ask why and then to investigate these open-ended questions is what can lead to discovery, which is so important in product design. Right, so I'll break this down into a couple of key concepts. Some of them may be a little bit familiar to you, but for those that aren't, I think you'll get a lot out of it. And even if it is, again, just take it as sort of a refresher. So the idea of product discovery, if you're familiar with something called dual track Scrum in the Agile process, this is like an illustration of that. So if you divide the work into two main tracks, one is a discovery track and the other is a delivery track, right? And so the delivery track is where you actually build the thing, and you want to try and break down what you're building into little bite-sized components and build it and ship it as efficiently as possible. But above that, and sort of before that, right, is this discovery track, which is figuring out what is the thing that we actually should be building. And this is one of the crucial distinctions of what makes actually product design a thing at an organization, is that they have product discovery. Is that they're specifically not just taking a list of requirements and building it, but they're going out and doing experiments. And through the process of experimenting via prototype, you're able to learn, and sort of through the Agile mindset, you can pivot based on what you learn. And as an empowered product team, you end up actually figuring out what those requirements are and defining those requirements as a group in partnership with your product folks. And so I think that's just like a really important role that we play as designers. And it's important to bring that mindset no matter where you are. You may already be doing it this way, but even if you're not, this is the #1 most impactful thing that you could do tomorrow, is to go back to your organization and say, huh, I heard about this thing called product discovery. And it doesn't sound like we're doing that. If that's you, Google it and like check into it a little bit and prepare some talking points. You can even message me on LinkedIn and I can recommend a book or something. But this kind of thing changes your whole approach to product design, because you're doing these rapid experiments and learning in a very scientific way what you actually need to be building, both in terms of not only what business requirements are, but also really by getting in with users and finding out what's going on in their lives and what they actually do need. So the stuff that I'm going to focus on, it's not going to be the more ethnographic stuff, right? So ethnographic would be like if you're studying teachers, if you're going to do an app, you think for teachers, you would like go to a classroom and observe teachers in the classroom, right? Like observing gorillas in their natural habitat. I'm going to talk about stuff for today that's just a little bit after that point, where you've developed some tentative hypotheses and you want to test them out by way of prototype. And then based on what you learn from those tests, you can draw out insights, and then those insights will give you what you need to know in order to make good product decisions. So what is a hypothesis? Well, it depends, first of all, if you're doing research, if you're building from the ground up, or if you're kind of starting top down. And what I mean by that, on the left, this is the model of inductive research. And this is what's called grounded theory, if you want to look into it. A grounded theory means that you're building a brand new theory from the ground up. And so that's the kind of thing where if you're investigating something totally new that no one really knows about, like attitudes and beliefs among AIDS patients who were doing X, Y, and Z, if it's something really esoteric, if you had to develop a brand new theory, then you would do that ethnographic research. And through the process of observing and interviewing people, you could take what they're saying and group and analyze and cluster the things that they're saying into themes, and then using their own words, what will start to emerge is patterns that leads to hypothesis, and you build a theory. And what I mean by theory is not just hypothetical, but a theory is an explanatory system that connects facts. So you're building an explanatory system from the ground up. Whereas on the right side, we have deductive research, which is more like if there already is some pre-existing theory, like some work has already been done. And this is more often the case where you're working on something that's not brand new. And then based on that theory, you can then build on it and say, well, which areas are so far as yet unexplored? And among those new areas, what are the hypotheses that we have? And based on those experiments, you can then observe and confirm or disprove. And so that's a really critical difference, because if you're going into the work and you treat everything as inductive, I think this is actually at the root of a lot of conflict, of like they won't let me do research thing that people run into, which I've run into at other companies. I think part of the problem is if you treat everything as if you're building it from scratch, from the ground up, it makes everything look like it's going to be this huge, like 9-month investigation before you can do anything, right? And so it's important not to fall into that unless you truly are doing something that's absolutely brand new. Whereas most of the time, there's already existing evidence that exists. There's already studies and published papers that you can use as a foundation. And so by using that evidence as a foundation, you can then identify what are the actual net new areas that we want to do experiments on. And then research becomes a lot more feasible because you're already working on the foundation that already exists. And that will allow you to still move fast. So just as an example to illustrate, how did this thing come about, right? I mean, this is one of the great things that I like about my vehicle, is having this ability to like wave your foot underneath and it pops the trunk. I could just imagine that, just kind of reverse engineering that. Somebody has this hypothesis that says, I believe busy shoppers would appreciate a foot sensor that opens the trunk of their car. And you can get that by observing, doing that ethnographic work to see people that are carrying bags of groceries with their handfuls and handful, and that's kind of like the pain point that they have, where they get to the car and then they have to put the groceries down and figure out how to load the groceries. So by observing that, you can develop ideas around like something that people would appreciate, and then you can prototype it out and find out. And you can do interviews to find out if people would actually like this as well. So breaking this down, the part that's outlined in red, that's the participant for the experiment. This is important because you have to identify who the relevant cohort of people is that you're going to be experimenting with. Now, just to back up for a second, if you're just evaluating gross level usability, like can people find their way through this interface, in that case you can test with sort of most anyone, right? You could test with people who are more available to you. But if you're getting into a niche thing where you want to confirm a belief about a specific group of people, it's important to make sure that you're testing with those actual people. And so that's where the recruiting comes in through your experiments. It's important to recruit the right group of people. And then here's the belief that you want to evaluate, right? So if you break it down that way, there are so many different ways to go about evaluating those beliefs and testing them. For example, one is you could do a conversation, a semi-structured conversation to explore around those concepts and just bring some visual stimulus with you, whether that's a pen-like sketch or it can be a digital prototype. And then, see, I think the difference with this is that you're not already testing the usability of a design, but you're still exploring the initial concept to see if this is something that the people in your target group actually would be interested in, or you pointed in the right direction, or do you need to rethink a little bit? And based on this approach, I've been able to learn a bunch of stuff. In most jobs that I've worked where I've been able to do this, you always learn something unexpected through these conversations. And through that, you can almost like rapidly cycle through and quickly grow and evolve your product design based on actual realistic things that you're learning from the people who would be using it. Right? And some of the advantages that gives you is that when the thing actually gets released and shipped, instead of having to have a bunch of training and having a bunch of instruction manuals to get people to conform themselves to use your product, it's the opposite. You're doing it from the inside out, where the product itself reflects the needs and attitudes and beliefs and way of thinking of the people who will actually be using it. There's also three-dimensional ways of doing this too. If what you're testing isn't just a touchscreen interface, you can prototype an experience. Like in this case, they're doing out of cardboard, they're prototyping like a shopping experience. And this is also really important because depending on the type of work that you're doing, you might be working on an individual digital touch points that sits within a broader experience that's called a service, and you have to prototype that as well. Because no matter how many good ideas you come up with for your digital product, like if people can't find where to start, for example, none of that will actually matter, right? Another key concept is this idea of evidence. So this is just like I mentioned, you don't have to build everything from scratch. You can just literally Google it, and you can find academic papers. And I've been doing more of this lately than I did before. But this is actually a really great thing because there's tons of stuff that you can quickly review. And it's actually a lot stronger when you think about it to work with established findings that have been tested with like 100 people or even 300 people. And there's even studies like a meta-analysis that has across 20 studies or 30 studies that is a lot stronger than one conversation that you had with somebody, right? So established findings are stronger than one-off anecdotes. You have to ensure that the source material you're looking at is reliable. So check who's publishing it, right? Anybody can put anything on the internet, but make sure that it's a valid source. And then use your limited time that you have for research to conduct original research on things that are still unknown. Another key concept is synthesis, right? So here's an idea of what a synthesis board might look like. You can do this however you want, right? In this case, they're using Trello, but as you conduct interviews and you have those conversations with or without prototypes, you want to capture what people are saying at sort of like an index card level or like a flashcard level. And then you group and categorize the things that they're saying into buckets. And then what makes it a synthesis is that you're not just saying like, we talked to John and John said this, so we're going to change the design. It's that you talk to John and Bob and Sally and Mary and Fitz and whoever, all these people, and then integrating, synthesizing what you learned across forms what's called a holistic description. So it's like a more well-rounded understanding of what you actually need to know. And then out of that synthesis, you then as a team or as an individual researcher can take a step back and perform analysis and think about and make inferences based on what you're seeing. And that's where the insights start to emerge, right? So in the data collection stage, everything that you're seeing kind of flows into evidence, right? But then with analysis and synthesis, you have lots of different evidence coming together. And then as you group it together, you can perform an interpretation on that evidence. And that's how you actually learn something that's going to actually like hold true. So when you release a product to thousands or tens of thousands of people, you'll be doing it based on findings that have held true across groups of people. Here's another idea that's really important is saturation. So like I mentioned, you don't want to just talk to one person, but as you as you talk to more people, like 5 or 7, you start learning more and more new things, and it starts you start getting to a point where you're not learning anything new anymore. And so it's all about finding that sweet spot where you're not wasting time, right? So I think like about 5 or 7 people on a particular topic is a point where you may see that you're not learning anything new anymore. And that's where, as a team, you'd want to decide this insight that we think we've learned about a thing that we were testing, do we want to now officially say like, yes, we believe that this is true? Or we believe that this is a thing that's not true. And I guess, technically, if you kept going and you scaled it and analyzed huge numbers of people, you would eventually start to learn something new. But the only way to get to that point is like through huge volumes, which you can do with more like data science and data analytics if you have many, many users. Another key concept is the sprint. I've heard about sprints. The important thing with a sprint, and I've been recently experimenting with this just at a high level, spend a week figuring out what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and then spend another week running experiments. But this is really important because at a lot of organizations, they don't really do sprinting. And what I mean by that is that they don't commit to solving a specific problem within a short period of time. A lot of places will just have like this rolling process of like someone comes up with an idea, you start working on it, then somebody else says, let's do something else. And you end up with a lot of unfinished work that way. So what's really important, this is another thing that's super valuable that you can bring if your organization's not doing it already, is this idea of sprinting, where you could have a 1-day sprint, 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or 6 weeks, like they do it at another organization. But the idea is that you plan upfront what you're going to investigate and then commit. And then based on that commitment, you focus on it until you can actually finish it out. So those are just some of the concepts at a high level. And that's what you need to know as we go into this exercise. So in the exercise, I'm going to share a link to Miro, and it's just going to be a blank template that has a problem statement around this idea that I mentioned about behavioral nudges for healthy eating. And then there'll be columns that represent the buckets for all of the different areas that we just covered. So hypotheses and all of that good stuff. And so what we'll do together is we'll jump in the Miro, and you can sort of swarm on these boards, and let's all just create a bunch of hypotheses and write down our ideas on how we might go about testing them, right? And I'll share that if that link hasn't already been, yeah, okay, I see a bunch of people are in it. So that's great. So this is the idea that you have identified a theme, and you can frame your problem statement as this kind of how might we. So if the theme is behavioral nudges for healthy eating, you could then ask, how might we encourage better food choices for people who say that they want to eat healthier so they can feel better and live longer? And so part of what we're staying open to is like, is this the right problem to be solving, right? And if so, what are some of the hypotheses we might be interested in? Another thing that I like to do is, look around. Again, consider this part of your evidence. Look at other apps that are doing something in this similar space and screen capture a bunch of that stuff and bring it in, because you don't have to wholesale. You wouldn't want to wholesale copy someone else's app, but there might be one aspect of it that's super interesting that you could either use, or think of it as like a remix. Like you could use this as material that you could then remix and say, oh, well, how could that kind of thing work in our application? And then here, let's look at the board. So I just did an illustration of this idea. If the theme is about swapping ingredients, substituting one ingredient for another that's slightly healthier, right, then one of the first things to do, apart from looking at other apps, is see if there's already any existing studies that are related to this that you will want to read, okay? And then start layering in some of your tentative hypotheses. These are the claims that you want to go test. And then think about, well, if we were going to run a test, how would we do it? There are all different kinds of tests, but one of the ones that I like a lot is the Think Aloud test, because it's so open-ended. You can show someone a prototype and just ask them to describe back to you what they're seeing and ask them to think aloud. And then you can kind of guide the conversation without controlling it and see what emerges out of it. How would you know if your test is validated or not? It's important to get that stuff written down up front so that when you run the test, you can actually say if this thing did or did not happen. So in this example, user indicates agreement that they would be willing to eat an apple instead of a donut. If that actually happens during the Think Aloud test, then you know it's validated. The tendency is whether, as you run these experiments, whether it looks like people are starting to agree or disagree with your claim. And this is where the saturation is really important, because if your tendency is based on a response from only one person, then the saturation level would be 1, which means it's not really worth a whole lot yet. And so you'd want to keep going until you get up to a higher level. Then if you're saying, okay, we've actually tried this with 7 people, then your tendency is a lot more valid. In terms of what's needed, you could do a quick wireframe. You could use any platform you want. A lot of the times I'll just use a sticky note to just describe what I'm going to want to then go and design in order to run these experiments. But if it's helpful, you could just do a quick illustration with just boxes. And then as long as you're in there, why not start to stub out a script of what actual task you'd want to give to the test participant in order to run that experiment. And then eventually, as you run the experiment, you'll be able to layer in the insights that came out of it. Okay, so those are the big buckets. I created a bunch of copies of this board. And so in order to use it, I think the board actually may be locked. So what you could do is either use the text tool to put in some text that you can type, right? And then let's just start filling these out. So think about our theme and then come up with, you can start either go on Google, find an example of an existing app that you can drop into this board, or find a paper that's been written about this subject, and then start writing some of your tentative hypotheses that you would like to test about this subject, okay? And we'll just go from there, and let's do this for a while, and then we'll share out and talk about what we got out of it, okay? Any questions before we get started? Okay, cool. Nice, let's dive in. It's a good comment in the chat. What people say they would do and what they do are two different things. That's true. That's totally true. There's a difference between giving someone a task and seeing what they actually do. I would actually like to start by just seeing what they say they would do, but you would actually ultimately want to give them a task and see what they do. Right. Uh, hey, I think I have a bunch of these boards copied on the side.
No, I think whoever kind of shifted out that one column, if you know who you are, just undo and it should correct it. Because it broke everyone's layout.
Okay, why don't we do a share out in a couple of minutes, and then we can just talk about the ones that stood out to us as being interesting ideas to test. Okay, here's an interesting one. People feel motivated to continue eating healthy when they have a visual of their progress or lack thereof. Whose idea was that?
Hi, it's Taryn speaking. It was my idea.
Cool. So what's your thinking there with that one?
So for me, it's based on, I know it's horrible to say as a designer, but on my personal experience, because I'm actually using MyFitnessPal at the moment. And I notice at the end of the day when I end my diary and it tells me if I continue this way in for this many days, this is what I would weigh, for example. And also just tracking it on a daily basis is helping me a little bit more to be conscious of the way I eat. So this one is based on a personal belief, and therefore I put it in as a hypothesis.
Yeah. With that example, do you think that it's the daily aspect of it, or is it also the you mentioned kind of like being able to see some kind of forecast, like if you continue, here's the forecast of where things are going. Are those the two strongest points?
Yeah, I think the latter is even stronger than the daily because the daily input of information is exhausting.
Yeah, so the importance of being able to visualize.
Mm.
Yeah, that's great. Let's pick another one here. Okay, this one looks built out. Okay, sport and healthy eating improves happiness and longevity. Sports system. Okay. Sure. Who wants to talk about this one, about sports and having a support system?
Hi, sorry, I guess that's me.
Cool. So what gave you that idea? about, let's see, well, so sports, yeah, I'm wondering if this would really be testable in the short term about improving longevity. But like, yeah, let's think about that. What is maybe like a short-term experiment that we could run around this idea?
I mean, there had, well, just as per some of the, I mean, a quick look at the articles that I was putting on the literature review. That was basically a sentence that just popped up in my eyes. Plus, you always hear about that, no? That sports and health eating improve your quality of life, and therefore, you feel better. It's everything about feeling better. It's everything about, staying healthy, feeling better, and therefore also they're supposed to live a little bit longer, no? So that was the idea behind.
Yeah, and there's so much positive reinforcement that comes out of it, right? I mean, I feel like that's one of the kind of ironic things is like it's hard to get started with healthy eating, but then if you do, it makes you feel better. I think there's some interesting idea about like what the tipping point might be with like kind of getting over, the initial resistance, and like kind of where, like, how do you get to that point where it feels like, you're feeling better because of it?
Well, there are also studies about endorphins being released after running or doing some sort of exercise and feeling better with yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that's also part of it, no? I mean, if you are doing some sort of exercise and then you feel proud of yourself, no? And that makes you happy, no? And it's actually, part of it is the endorphins, no? So it's a physical reaction.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm wondering if there's something around maybe like getting people to notice those feelings. Like if there's some way that an app could like slow down that process, whether it's like journaling or something like that, or some way to like get yourself to see that you're feeling better.
Yeah, actually, I in the how to test, I also included journalists, but I deleted by mistake. I mean, if you're also using like running apps or so, at the end of the run, they ask you, how do you feel? What was it difficult?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting, no? Because there are, I think that, and for me, use research also is a lot about putting the user in front of a mirror and saying, okay, so how all of these make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, when you're filling out, with my fitness pal or with the running apps, it's like, okay, so after you have done it, which is really great, how are you feeling about it? No, I mean, and then it's like, okay, so I feel proud. I feel, I did it. I didn't think I was going to do it. So, and also they're asking you what was difficult. No.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's awesome. What about in this table here? Let's see. Okay, here's some that are more built out. Who did this one around conscious decision making with food choices?
That was me, Adam.
Oh, cool. So what's your hypothesis there?
So I actually heard about this study a while ago, like on TV or the radio or somewhere. And essentially it says every time that you make a decision about food, if you think about what the impact is going to be on the same day, tomorrow, a week on, after a year or after 5 years, if you continue making the same choice, then people are much more likely to actually choose healthier options. And then I actually found the study online. I put in a particularly long Google search string and it came up. And it basically says that people that suffer from obesity, if they follow this technique, it has been proven to reduce obesity and help them with their food choices. So the hypothesis is that if people do think about the long-term consequences during each decision about what to eat, then they will make healthier decisions. And I was thinking how to test it. Probably something like an A/B test, where you basically present people with a kind of a normal decision around food without them thinking about the consequences of their decision. So maybe in a restaurant setup, or they ordering food on a Uber Eats or something, and then you observe what choices they make. So I'm assuming this would have to be a large study. And then the alternative test would be if you give them some kind of an aid, like maybe a prototype or even just a card or something, prompting them to think about what's the impact going to be in 1 day, 1 year, 5 years on your life, and then to see the results. So I'm assuming it would be quite a clear winner if you do give people that. So it's going to be difficult to get them to use the app, I guess, while they're making the decisions. That would probably be the tricky part. And yeah, that was pretty much my thinking there.
No, that's awesome. I just had this thought that sort of came to mind as you were talking about that. Like, I don't know, this might be sort of cumbersome, but like, if not like VR, but or maybe something like a VR, something you could do on your phone or something. Like, I just picture this thing where when you talk about long-term consequences, like if I could take my phone and point it at something that I was going to eat, and then have it somehow like overlay like what's the 5-year effect of that, or like 10-year. I don't know. It might be kind of like a little bit Black Mirror, but like I don't know. Just had that thought.
No, we should collaborate on this idea.
Yeah, why don't we do a couple more? Does anyone see theirs on this board? Social support for healthy eating, tracking healthy choices. They'd like to call out.
So social support for healthy eating was something that I put onto the board, and it's something that my friends and I have been doing for a while. It sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't, but I think it's persistence that's key. It goes back to the psychology of it, with people like us, and wanting to sort of bring people with a similar goal together. So if we have a similar goal of eating healthy, we form a group, and we hold each other accountable for the things that we are eating and the exercise that we're doing, etc. So that was the idea.
Yes, 100%. People are just such social beings that having a community really helps with any type of goal like that. That's awesome.
I have a question around Atisha's idea. How would you then track the weakest link?
So what happens is that we usually post pictures of what we're eating and the exercise that we're doing. We track it with our Apple Watches and things. So we hold each other accountable in that way, and then we can motivate people who aren't doing. And obviously you feel kind of bad if you're not doing something that everyone else is doing. So that's sort of like a thing that gets everybody on board.
Cool. It reminds me of the one episode on The Office where everybody was like trying to lose weight and they went on this big scale. So that's what I had in mind when you pitched that idea.
That sounds insane. But lots of fun. It's lots of fun.
This is an interesting one. People aren't sure what food types to eat and when to eat them. Yeah. Let's think about what could we do in the short term to test that idea, to find out if people are not sure what food types to eat and when to eat them.
I think it goes back to understanding macros, because it's all have to do with like macros, and there's like a certain percentage of protein you need to eat, or fats or fiber and all that stuff. So if people have a clear understanding of that, then I think they would have an understanding as to what food groups they should tackle in order to lose weight or gain muscle, whatever it is.
Yeah, this is great. You know, I think definitely just zooming out, we have, I think it's just pretty cool. Within, you know, inside of 30 minutes or so, we came up with a couple of ideas that you could definitely use this as a starting point to create a pretty cool set of experiments. So yeah, Bianco, I think that's pretty much, I think maybe we could do like one or two more and then we could go to the Q&A or something.
Yes, no, let's look at one or two more options. If you spot something that looks interesting, we can just ask the author to tell us about it.
Let's see here. So on meal planning, about what would happen if they were provided with a menu. No, all right. Who did this one on bulk meal prep?
I did. So the thing I was thinking about, it's like if people think about bulk meal prep, it would be it will lead them to more healthy options when they want to cheat, because the most I was thinking about, oh, why do they ditch the healthy eating habits? So I thought probably they don't have any time to prep their foods, and prepping their food is like a whole process, and it takes time to organize that and do that and storage all that food. So if we make it more easy for people to do this process, it will change their eating habits. That was my hypothesis for this thing.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's an underlying theme around some of these past few ideas where a lot of the decisions people are making are based on sort of what's most convenient or what's immediately available. But I really like how your idea plays into that, where if you have healthier choices that are right, you know, at arm's length, you might be more inclined to use them.
Yeah.
And your idea for how to test that was start with an interview, understand some of their pain points, and then have them do it like a diary study, have them keep a diary.
Yes. So this hypothesis, we need to validate it, because like I am thinking about, okay, they don't have any time to do healthy meals, but what if they have time and they don't want to go to the healthy meals? That makes whole project is a time waste probably. So keeping a diary and having an interview with the users will actually guide. I was thinking about guiding me to the see their actual habits and understand their motivations behind their habits.
So kind of getting back to the more ethnographic approach to see what they do. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam, for your teachings and your insight with regards to the scientific methods of product design.
Yeah, thanks.
a lot of insightful things considering how I'm just a UX analyst. So the work that you do is pretty important, and I feel like it contributes a lot to bettering our society.
Yeah, I mean, this, of course, is like sort of like a paperclip version of, this is a very compressed, simplified version, but I think it was worth doing, even if there's literally, if there's like one person somewhere in the world who saw this and thought, oh, that's a really good, approach that we're not currently doing. If I can just get one person to feel like they want to they want to take this type of approach a little bit more and dig into it a little bit more, I think that it's worth it. I think in actual practice, and like sort of as has been pointed out in some of the discussion, like there is more complexity to it in order to do something that's like really actually measurable. But I think still, though, even just taking a step back and having this conversation was worth it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Adam. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to combine our networking session with our Q&A so that we can wrap things up quickly. So Adam, just to quickly share my screen, we're quickly going to ask you a few questions from our attendees. Could you please tell us about your experience joining a big pharmaceutical company during the COVID pandemic?
Well, I don't actually work on that stuff, but my experience is like the product design team has been actually really good. What I like about it is that there is this mindset of experimentation being really important, which you don't always see that in design teams. I mean, I don't know about you all and where you've worked, but I've seen that it's really kind of all over the map. Some places on one end of the spectrum is like, here's a preconceived solution, here's a list of stuff, let's go build it. All the way at the other side, which I mean, I actually personally really appreciate, is that there's a shared mindset about experimentation and about kind of staying skeptical, and even just saying like, we're not 100% sure what we want to make yet. So like, let's go spend time and energy to figure that out first before we commit to exactly what we're going to be doing, which I personally found really refreshing in comparison to some other opportunities I've had.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Demetrius who'd like to know, how do you make sure that the research done across the company has solid internal validity, especially when people that aren't trained on how to do user research get to do user research?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to leadership, right? You have to have, I think that I've worked with, and I'm happy to work with like junior designers and stuff like that. I mean, and as a teacher, I mean, I've worked with people who are like straight out of school, and I think it's our responsibility, if you're a lead, or even if you're like a senior designer or sort of mid-level, to be able to take someone under your wing on the team and show them an example of how to do something. And then it's kind of like you have to model the right way to do it, and then gradually reduce the amount of assistance that you're providing until they are able to do it on their own. But it is, so I think it's okay to have people helping and participating who may not themselves be experts, as long as there's leadership from someone who is providing a good example and who can regularly check in and make sure that everyone's getting the support they need in order to do a really good job.
So Adam, just a follow-up question with that answer, how would one then be able to distinguish between a good manager and a good leader? Because I feel like a lot of people have this misconception that just because you are a good manager, they think they are a great leader.
Oh, sure. Well, like there's a lot written about that, about how leadership can happen at any level, and it often does. Like a lot of times, some of the strongest leadership comes from someone who, I guess if you think of it as like hierarchically, who's the manager, leadership often happens from kind of below. And that's a good thing. And I think in in a good, strong organization, that kind of thing is encouraged, where hierarchies become less important. And one of the first things that I learned as a manager is that you depend on that. Like, people on the team are going to be hungry for the opportunity to step up, and you can sort of like start to see how people are demonstrating their strength, and you see like kind of what their superpower is. And so if you're a good manager, you should be able to promote that, and you can actually sort of like share the leadership with someone and say, here, would you like to lead this part? Would you like to lead this part? If the person is ready to do that. Likewise, I think that management is about creating, a lot of it is about creating the space where design can actually thrive. So like keeping people out of recurring meetings, or trying to make sure that designers are actually empowered to run the experiments and blah, blah, blah. I think that has a lot to do with it. So like the manager and the leader don't necessarily need to be one and the same. I think leadership can be more distributed.
100%. Thank you so much for that, Adam.
Sure.
Our second question comes from Giovanni, and they'd like to know, can you suggest a starting point to find relevant research papers? Is there a website or a forum that have suggestions? And is there some journals that you can recommend?
Yeah, tell you what, aside from just like looking on Google, send me a message on LinkedIn with that question, and I'll try to get back to you with more specific examples, because I'd be happy to check into it.
Awesome. So Giovanni, please connect with Adam on LinkedIn, and they'll be more than happy to assist you on LinkedIn. And another question from Demetrius, who would like to know, what has worked for you when trying to figure out if past research has been done correctly with regards to internal/external validity and construct validity as well?
Yeah. So if one thing that came up at a studio that I was working at was, in the studio environment, people often change teams. So I ended up looking at research, like a research synthesis, a research readout that had been performed by another team. Unfortunately, the person still worked there. So I was able to actually set aside time and talk with them about how they did it. And it was definitely reassuring along those lines, because I could tell that they definitely knew what they were doing. So if you're in a company where people move around a lot, see if you can reach back out to the person who was involved in that research if they're still there, and they'll probably be willing to give you like 5 minutes to chat through it.
Thank you, Demetrius, for that question. Now for our next question, how would you use the practical method from tonight to validate if people from a target user group are likely to use a product or service?
Say again?
How would you use the practical method from tonight to validate if people from a target user group are likely to use a product or service?
To see if they're likely to use it? Yeah, and I think that's where the synthesis comes in, because you can have, as you talk with any one individual, and that's where the saturation is really important, because you could see that maybe in one conversation, it looks like somebody isn't going to use it, but it's important not to conclude. And this actually happens like more often than you'd believe. It's important not to just do one test and say, okay, people don't like this. People aren't going to use it. I've seen that happen multiple times, where, it's kind of like, oh yeah, let's test this. All right, we tested it. People don't like it. And then that's sort of documented as the conclusion, which is really important not to do that. All you're concluding is, we talked with one person. They said they're not going to use it. It looks like they're not going to use it. That's what we're reading into it, right? But you have to keep going. And then you have to do it with enough people that you can then make more of a realistic generalization. And
Adam, how do you convince the team or product owner that you need to spend equal or even more time on discovery at the same time as delivery?
Oh, well, product owners are usually very appreciative of what happens in discovery, because in order for them to actually know what ideas they're going to prioritize for the product definition and what features actually should be in it, they should be saying like, hey, research, what are we learning? And so I think that the product owner the product owner traditionally would like sit right next to the design lead, so that you can have those kind of conversations all the time. So I think what you have to do is kind of like show and collaborate with them so that they can actually see and feel that you're helping them make really well-informed product decisions. And part of that means inviting them to be part of some of the interviews and experiments, but also you have to be able to do like really good, concise explanations of what the insights are, so that they see you as a source of like intel, where you become one of their really valuable allies, because you're the one that's able to tell them what's going on so that they can make well-informed decisions, and then they really appreciate it. And the next thing you know, like there might be some resistance if someone like hasn't done it before, but if you can keep delivering actionable insights, the next thing you know, it's going to be the opposite. They're going to be like, oh, let's do an experiment about this, or like you should go do a research about this, and they'll be asking you for more stuff than you have time for.
Oh man, thank you for that. Last but not least, which world city would you recommend as a must-visit location, and why?
I am partial to, because I spent 4 years living in Japan, and I think if you haven't gone there yet, it's a blast. As far as which city, check out Matsuyama, Japan. That should be your next vacation spot. Once we're post-COVID and all that, it's a really charming area. It's a lot of fun. They have great, beautiful gardens and natural hot springs and all kinds of good stuff. So I myself hope to go back there next time I get a real vacation and do some family travel and stuff like that.
Would you ever consider coming to South Africa?
Heck yeah. If it hadn't been COVID and if I had more time, I would have loved to do this in person. It would have been a lot more fun. So, we'll keep in touch. Maybe sometime next year, I can tell my family, pitch them on an idea of doing a vacation in South Africa. I think it'd be a blast.
Awesome. I think everyone today will hold you to that. So we'll be seeing you sometime soon.
Excellent. Thanks again for hanging out, taking time out of your day to come and talk design. It was fun for me, and I hope everyone got something out of it. So really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adam, for availing yourself and giving us such valuable information. I'm pretty sure everyone learned something very insightful. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now be moving on to the last section of our session today, which is the networking component. We will be networking on Teams, so attendees will be automatically assigned to different breakout rooms. This should give you an opportunity to interact with one another and know more about what it is that you do in your career paths and what you'd like to learn from each other. So you're going to spend about roughly 10 minutes so that you can bounce back and forth just chatting with one another. Awesome. Yaku, are you going to break people into the rooms?
Yes, I'm going to allocate everyone now. Just quickly share about the next meetup, because I think a few people are probably going to leave as well. So you can just tell them about the next one in May, and then I'll send everyone into the breakout rooms.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, I'd like to announce our next guest speaker for our next UX Joburg meetup, which will be happening in May. This individual is the founder of the award-winning user experience consulting firm called Experience Dynamics. He is a highly experienced UX designer / researcher and a UX leader with a focus on return on investment of user experience. He has led 100 projects to date. He's also a UX master trainer, having trained over 300 teams, over 4,000 UX students globally through the Interaction Design Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be having the one and only Frank Spillers as our next guest speaker, with over 22 years of enterprise UX experience with Fortune 500 clients, including Nike, Intel, Microsoft, HP, and Capital One. This is definitely a talk that you wouldn't want to miss. So please, ladies and gentlemen, look out for our next UX Joburg meetup with our guest